A dog? No, think carefully. Who cares about a dog? A baby? No, I can't. I wouldn't stop thinking about my brother. And what about a man? Maybe the priest? Oh, no way. Too heavy, too strong. A woman, then? What about a nun? That's how 3 teenage girls, while sitting at a table in a bar, decided to end someone's life. You're probably asking yourself why. There must be a reason behind all this evil. And what if I told you there isn't? What if I told you this is just a consequence of boredom? That's where this story unfolds, around the banality of evil. But before we begin, hi, I'm Martina, and welcome to the dark side of Italy. There's something about small towns in the mountains, the way the silence doesn't feel peaceful, but watchful. Like the air itself is listening. Chiavenna is one of those towns, tucked in northern Italy, between valleys and rivers, where everyone knows everyone and everything always feels the same. The same bars, the same faces, the same stories whispered over espresso cups, and maybe that sameness, that dull, quiet routine, was the perfect place for something truly terrible to be born. Sister Maria Laura Mainetti lived in that quiet. She was born far away in Valtellina, the 10th child of Stefano and Marcellina. Her mother died just days after she was born. So, from her very first breath, she learned what absence feels like. A family friend, Sister Maria Amelia, took her in. She studied with the Daughters of the Cross, first in Parma, then in Rome, and somewhere along the way, she heard a priest say something that would shape her entire life. You must do something beautiful for others. It's June 2000, the Jubilee year, a time of forgiveness, renewal, and faith. But that summer, Chiavenna feels tense. The town is restless, too many teenagers hanging around bars, too much alcohol, too little to do. It's the kind of boredom that makes you reckless. 3 girls, 16, 17 years old, spent most of their evenings in the same bar, sharing secrets, music, and a growing fascination with darkness. They talk about cutting, about rituals, about how dull life feels. They were desperately searching for a spark, something shocking, something that will make them feel. And one night, over half-finished drinks and the hum of an old jukebox, they start playing a game. If you had to kill someone, one says, who would it be? And that is exactly how the idea was born. Not out of hate, not out of anger, but out of boredom. The pure, banal emptiness of a young life left too long to fester. They didn't know her, not really, but Sister Maria Laura was visible. She walked the streets, she smiled, she said hello. She was the embodiment of everything they weren't. Kind, calm, certain. And so, she became the perfect target. Veronica, Ambra, Milena. These were their names, the names of our 3 protagonists, all between 16 and 17 years old. They studied at a hospitality and tourism school in the province of Sondrio. On paper, they looked like hundreds of other teenagers in small northern towns. They studied, they spent their weekends in the square or at the go-kart track. They weren't outcasts. They weren't abused. They were, as everyone kept saying later, normal. That word, normal, became almost unbearable after the murder, because it made no sense. Neighbors remembered them as quiet, sometimes moody. One woman said, Ambra was always dressed in black. She changed her hair all the time, red one week, short the next. Another added, "They used to hang out in bars. They drank, but we all did when we were their age. They were just girls, but inside their friendship, something dangerous was forming." Veronica was raised by her uncles in a context of social isolation. She was the one who felt things so deeply, but still on the surface she was the one who seemed the coldest. At 12, she started cutting herself with a compass during class. She would carve her name or others into her arm, watching the blood rise to the surface like she was in search of a proof that she still existed. When psychologists later asked why, she said, "I stopped feeling pain. Cutting made the anxiety go away. It was the only way to calm me down." Milena was different, quiet, dependent, eager to please. She followed the others everywhere, terrified of being left behind. In the friendship, she was the glue, the one who kept the peace, who balanced the extremes. But still, she was considered as the weak link in the group. Her childhood was marked by serious problems such as eating disorders and, later on, even alcohol abuse. But that was something that all three of them had in common. The violence they practiced on themselves wasn't satisfying anymore. They wanted to externalize it, to see what it looked like when directed at someone else. And that's when Sister Maria Laura's name came up. Their plan to reach that moment, the murder of Sister Maria Laura, unfolded like this. At first, it was just childish cruelty, prank phone calls from the back of a bar. A trembling voice on the line, a sob that wasn't real. "Hello, sister, I'm pregnant, I don't know what to do." And then a click. But jokes turn into plans when boredom meets a hunger for meaning. They wanted her attention, then her presence, then the power of making someone come to them. So they built up Erika. Veronica will be the voice on the phone, the trembling, frightened teenager. Ambra and Milena refined the story in whispers between classes. Details, timing, where the sisters walked at night, which bench she preferred. June the 3rd, 2000 was the actual first attempt. The convent phone rings late. The other sisters are sleeping. Veronica, pretending to be Erika, on the line, says she's been raped. She says she's pregnant and alone and scared of what their parents could do to her. Sister Maria Laura listens and, as she always did, answers the call. She does not go alone. She calls a volunteer from the local Centro di Aiuto alla Vita, the Center for Life. She arrives. Her and the nun walk together to the bench by the river, the meeting point set by Erika. A girl is there, thin, restless, speaking in fragments. She says a man in his 50s picked her up while hitchhiking and raped her. The friend tries to pin down names and facts. The girl's answers slip away. Then, almost without warning, she stands up and says, "I'm sorry, I have to go," and disappears into the night. The plan was small and stupid and monstrous in equal measure. When the moment actually came, nothing went as planned. At the edge of the park, Veronica stopped walking. She looked at the nun and said, "Sister, I'd like to come live with you in your community." The words disarmed her. Maria Laura smiled. She had heard similar things before from troubled girls. "If you really want that," she said gently, "we can talk about it." Veronica nodded, then looked down. "But I left my bag in a friend's car. She's parked just over there, near the beginning of the path. Can we go get it?" Sister Maria Laura hesitated. The path she pointed to was narrow, unlit, running between the river and a low stone wall. Still, she trusted the girl. She always did. Veronica took a few steps forward, then gestured to the darkness ahead. Two other figures appeared, Ambra and Milena. Sister, Veronica said softly, these are my friends. They came with me. I hope it's okay. Maria Laura smiled again. Of course, she said. Che brave amiche che hai. What good friends you have. She didn't know those would be her last words of kindness. The girls had imagined everything would be simple, quick. They'd seen it in movies, read it in crime papers. One hit to the head, one stab to the heart, and it would all be over. That's what they told themselves. That death would be fast, almost clean, a game with rules, a performance. But real violence doesn't work like that. As they reached the darker part of the path, Veronica slipped her hand into her bag. She pulled out a piece of stone she had taken from the ground earlier that day, flat, heavy, wrapped in a rag. She walked behind the sister. For a few seconds, she froze. Then she lifted the stone and struck her on the back of the head. The blow was strong, but it didn't make her fall. Sister Maria Laura turned around, stunned, blood already running down her neck. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." But they weren't listening anymore. Ambra and Milena hesitated. It wasn't supposed to look like this. There wasn't supposed to be talking or blood or eyes still open. Someone shouted, "Do it!" and the knives came out. One of them stabbed first, then another, then another. Later, in their confessions, they said they had lost count. They said they thought one strike each would be enough. But the sister kept breathing. She tried to walk, then she fell to her knees. "God, forgive them," she whispered. A prayer, not a curse. The girl said her voice was soft, not pleading, almost peaceful. 19 stab wounds, back, chest, face, neck. One too many. One of them later said, "I didn't think it would take so long. In the movies, you hit once and it's over." She wouldn't die, she kept looking at us, and in those seconds, between the last breath and the first silence, they swore she looked at them, not with hatred, but with pity. Then they ran. They washed the knives in the public fountain. The water turned pink, then clear again. Afterwards, they went to the fairground. They met friends, they laughed, they took pictures, they ate cotton candy, and then they went home to sleep. When they found her body the next morning, the scene was almost too quiet. Her knees were bent, her hands clasped, as if she had been praying when she fell. 19 stab wounds, one to the face, 6 to the back, others to the chest and neck. Her veil lay beside her, soaked in blood. The first police officers to arrive didn't know what to think. It didn't look like a robbery. Her rosary, her small crucifix, everything was still there. So they began with the most obvious question. Who would want to hurt a nun? In a town like Chiavenna, the thought was unthinkable. So at first, they looked elsewhere. The first suspect was a man, violent, known to the police for beating his wife and daughters. Then they investigated from the margins of the community. The drug addicts and troubled young men that Sister Maria Laura used to help. Maybe one of them had turned on her. When that led nowhere, they looked outside Chiavenna. Maybe it was a stranger, someone passing through. A theory that comforted the town. Because it's easier to believe that evil comes from elsewhere. No one wanted to imagine that it could have come from inside. For weeks, there was only confusion. Then, an investigator noticed something small. A detail. 3 days before the murder, someone had called the convent asking for the sister. A girl's voice. That same voice had called again the night she was killed. So, they built an identikit, the drawing of a young girl about 16 or 17, dark curly hair, round face, maybe pregnant. The newspaper printed it with a note. The Carabinieri of Sondrio are searching for a teenage girl who may be in distress. She wasn't a suspect yet. They thought she was a witness. An officer, one of those patient ones who spend more time watching than talking, started visiting the cafes where local kids gathered. He sat there for hours pretending to read the newspaper. One morning, he left the paper open on the table before leaving for a walk. On the front page was the identikit. When he returned an hour later, he noticed something new. Someone had written a name beneath the drawing, Ambra. That was the first crack in the wall. From that moment, everything started moving fast. Investigators tracked the phones used near the scene of the murder. 3 numbers kept appearing in the same area. All belonged to girls from Chiavenna, Ambra, Milena, and of course, Veronica. They began listening, days of silence, then a careless phrase. But that picture doesn't even look like me. My hair's red now, like a traffic light. On June the 28th at 6 a.m., the Carabinieri officers arrived at 3 houses simultaneously. The girls had made a pact. If something went wrong, they'd warn each other with a text message. At Veronica's home, the phone buzzed just as officers were speaking to her mother. A message, a single name, Ambra. That morning, Veronica turned 17. It was her birthday. Instead of candles, she got handcuffs. The 3 were taken first to the station in Sondrio, then transferred to Milan, to the juvenile prison. At that time, Beccaria was one of the few Italian youth correctional facilities. Its echoing hallways and locked classrooms held about 500 minors, almost all boys, only 2,000 girls. The director, Father Gino, met them shortly after they arrived. He later said they were dazed, like they'd fallen out of a dream. They kept saying it was a game, a challenge, something that got out of hand. But what they had done wasn't a game. During questioning, the police noticed something chilling. None of the 3 seemed aware of what they had done. Only Milena cried. Ambra stared ahead, almost defiant. Veronica sat in silence. One of the psychiatrists who met them, Massimo Picozzi, wrote that he had never felt such emptiness. I found 3 perfectly normal girls, he said. No monsters, no signs of madness, just ordinary teenagers detached from the meaning of what they'd done. Veronica showed him the scars of her arms and legs, cuts she'd made years earlier with a compass and a kitchen knife. She said she once broke her wrist punching a wall. Another time, she hit her knee with a pen hard enough to need crutches. When asked why, she said, "The blood calms me down." Milena admitted that both she and Veronica had been cutting themselves. After we did it, she said, she was calmer. When their homes were searched, police found notebooks filled with symbols, satanic litanies, and drawings of knives. One page described a pact of blood, the same ritual they had performed together before the killing. This wasn't part of a real sect. It was what investigators called Satanismo fai da te, DIY Satanism, an imitation, a pose, a way of turning boredom into something that looked like rebellion. But the timing of the murder, June the 6th, 2000, the 6th day of the 6th month, and the 19 stab wounds, supposed to be 18, 6 for each, led many to believe there had to be something more. The press was quick to call it a satanic sacrifice. The church called it the devil's work, but psychiatrists saw something different. Not evil, but as we have already said, emptiness. They called it the banality of evil, when cruelty doesn't come from hatred or ideology, but from apathy, from the vacuum left by meaninglessness. The investigation moved fast, but the trial took time, because this wasn't just a murder case. It was a test for how Italy dealt with evil. The trial for the murder of Sister Maria Laura began in February 2001, before the Tribunale per i Minori di Milano, the juvenile court, because all three girls were under 18. In Italy, minors between 13 and 18 are judged by a separate system, with psychologists and psychiatrists sitting alongside the judges. They are considered personalities in development, so their ability to understand and to will, to distinguish right from wrong, is never presumed. It has to be proven. From the very start, their lawyers asked for the rito abbreviato, the abbreviated trial. As I explained in my first episode, this is a special Italian legal procedure that allows for a shorter trial in exchange for a 1/3 reduction of the sentence. It's often chosen when the evidence is overwhelming. And here, obviously, it was. Before the court could begin, it ordered a psychiatric evaluation. Doctors needed to understand what was going on inside the mind of these three girls. The first report painted a dark but complex picture. Veronica and Milena were diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, unstable moods, impulsive behavior, a deep fear of abandonment. They were considered partially capable of understanding their actions, but emotionally fragile and socially dangerous. Ambra, instead, was diagnosed with a dependent personality disorder and PTSD, along with narcissistic and depressive traits. She was found fully capable of understanding and wanting of her actions. All three showed narcissistic and depressive traits, a mirror of each other's emptiness. Then the defense asked for a second evaluation, and that report changed everything. The new psychiatrists confirmed that the three shared a deep psychological disturbance, but they saw their roles differently. According to the second perizia, their violence was not planned in a rational way. It was the result of group dynamics, the phenomenon psychologists call group thinking. Milena's dependent nature made her the glue of the trio. She held the group together, always following, never leaving. Ambra, with her fascination for the occult, provided the ideology, the meaning behind the act, even if it was confused, distorted, childish. Veronica, with her history of self-harm, gave the group its raw energy, its pain, its anger, its drive. The new report concluded that Veronica and Milena had a reduced capacity to understand and to will at the moment of the murder. Ambra, instead, was described as completely incapable of understanding or controlling her actions. It was the exact opposite of what the first report had said. The trial opened on February the 5th, 2001. Ambra and Milena entered the courtroom crying. They begged forgiveness from the families and from the church. Veronica stayed silent, staring at the floor. The public prosecutor asked for harsh sentences: 15 years and 4 months for Ambra, 11 years and 4 months for Veronica, and 10 years and 4 months for Milena. The defense asked for acquittal on the grounds of total insanity. The verdict came in August 2001. The courtroom was silent as the judge read. Veronica, 8 years and 6 months. Milena, 8 years, 6 months and 20 days. Ambra acquitted, declared totally incapable of understanding or willing her actions. The town of Chiavenna refused to accept it. To them, it sounded like an excuse, a way of erasing responsibility. People wanted justice, not pathology. The persecution appealed. In April 2002, the Court of Appeal overturned the decision. Ambra, who had been declared insane, was now sentenced to 12 years and 4 months, four more than the others. The court considered her capable of understanding what she was doing. For Veronica and Milena, the sentences stayed the same, because the Italian law doesn't allow a heavier sentence when the appeal is filed by the defendants themselves. All three were ordered to serve their time in the juvenile system, the Istituti Penali Minorili, called IPM. None of them ever entered a normal adult prison. There, the atmosphere was different from what most imagine when they hear the word prison. Classes, therapy, long days in silence. And that's how the legal story ended, with 3 partial sentences and a town that still couldn't understand how something so monstrous could have come from people so ordinary. Today, more than 20 years later, the 3 women live under new names. They left Chiavenna, built families, had children. But what about Suor Maria Laura? On June 6, 2021, exactly 21 years after her death, the Church declared her blessed, beatified in the same town where she died, honored for having given her life in the name of forgiveness. When you walk through Chiavenna now, you can still see the bench where she met Erika and the small park by the river where she was killed. The town has changed, but the silence feels the same. The kind of silence that listens, that kind of silence that remembers. I want to leave all of you with a reflection. After the verdicts, Italy needed an explanation, because the idea that 3 teenage girls could kill a nun without hatred, without gain, was too hard to accept. So the country looked for answers and found Satan. It was easier that way. If you call something satanic, you don't have to admit it was human. The case of Chiavenna exploded in the middle of what historians call the satanic panic, a moral wave that had already swept through the United States and Europe, making every violent act look like a ritual. And here in Italy, those fears found new life. Just a few years later, the story would return, darker, bloodier, with Le bestie di Satana, the beasts of Satan. But that is a story that I'll tell you one day, right here on the dark side of Italy. Maybe the truth about Chiavenna was simpler and scarier, not the work of demons, but of boredom, of emptiness so deep it turns apathy into violence. That's what we call the banality of evil, like the Hannah Arendt book. When horror doesn't come from darkness itself, but from the absence of meaning. Thank you for listening. I'm Martina, and this was The Dark Side of Italy. See you next time.